The mahogany table in my dining room gleamed under the soft light, a stage I had set with meticulous care. I'd wiped it down until the dark wood reflected the deep red of my mother's bone china. In the center, arranged on ceramic platters I'd brought back from a long-ago trip to Japan, was $200 worth of pristine sushi from Kura, a place I'd been patronizing since the 90s. Every piece of glistening tuna, every delicately placed roll of salmon roe, was a prop in a play I didn't yet know I was starring in at My name is Walter Thompson. For 35 years, I taught Japanese literature at Berkeley. It's a profession that trains you not just in the beauty of language, but in the architecture of a lie. You learn to spot the student who hasn't read the text, the one who fabricates an analysis, hoping your eye will glaze over the citation. You develop a sixth sense for intellectual dishonesty. And that sense was about to be triggered in the most personal way imaginable. 3 days earlier, my daughter Sarah had called. Her voice, it had a frequency I hadn't heard in years. A lightness, a vibration of pure, unguarded joy. After her last relationship had ended in a slow, painful collapse 2 years ago, I'd watched my vibrant girl retreat into the safe, sterile corridors of her work as a product manager. She built routines like fortifications. But this was different, Dad. I'm bringing someone really important. I think you'll love him. That sentence. It was a key turning in a lock I feared had rusted shut. She was 32. The shadow of a lonely future had begun to creep into the corners of my mind. So, I'd ordered the extra hamachi. I'd polished the silver. I prepared my heart for a son. And then he arrived. Kenji Yamamoto. He was a portrait of studied perfection. A navy blazer that whispered money, not shouted it. Posture so straight, he presented me with a bottle of sake, so expensive I could have paid my gas bill for the season with it, bowing slightly as he offered it with both hands. The performance was flawless. Mr. Thompson, he'd said, his English crisp, almost too perfect. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. His smile was a weapon of mass deception. Sarah practically glowed beside him. Her hand was wrapped around his arm, her knuckles white with the intensity of her grip, as if she'd been adrift at sea for years and had finally found a solid, unmovable rock to cling to. The sight of her happiness was a physical ache in my chest. I wanted this to be real for her so badly, but then his eyes. They moved across my dining room, over the walnut bookshelf my father had built with his own hands, across the vintage California landscape painting that had hung there since my childhood. It wasn't a glance of appreciation. It was an appraisal. Cold, calculating. A realtor doing a mental valuation. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, a flicker of something sharp and acquisitive beneath the charming veneer. But I caught it. 35 years of spotting dishonesty had honed my instincts to a razor's edge. This felt like watching a student fabricate a citation, praying I wouldn't check the source that we sat. The feast began. Mr. Thompson, Kenji said, setting down his chopsticks. I noticed immediately he was holding them awkwardly, the way someone does who learned from YouTube tutorials rather than family dinners. The grip was tense, unstable. Sarah tells me, you taught Japanese literature at Berkeley for over 3 decades. That must have been fascinating work. It had its moments, I replied, my voice neutral. I poured sake into his tiny ceramic cup, following the traditional protocol, not filling it to the brim, a sign of respect. I watched to see if he'd know to reciprocate. He did, but his execution was slightly off, the angle of the bottle. Your English is excellent. Another tiny, offered. How long have you been in the States? Crack. About 8 years now, he said, his smile widening but not reaching his eyes. San Francisco felt like home immediately. The energy here, the opportunities in finance. I work as a senior analyst at Greenfield Partners downtown. Sarah beamed, interjecting. Kenji's being modest, Dad. He manages accounts worth millions. The financial sector here is competitive, Kenji continued, a well-rehearsed line. But I've built a stable position. I believe in security, planning for the future. Family legacy matters. Family legacy. The phrase landed in the center of the table like a lead weight. Not building a legacy, just legacy. as if it were something already existing, something to be acquired, like a stock portfolio or a piece of real estate. He was looking at my bookshelf again. When he complimented the house's great bones and its investment potential, I felt the muscles along my jawline tighten. He didn't say, "It feels like a home," or "You can sense the history here." No, it was investment potential. I was no longer a future father-in-law. I was an asset manager sitting on a valuable, underperforming asset. And that's when I made my first move. A piece of perfect, ruby red tuna sat on my plate. I deliberately fumbled with my own chopsticks, letting the morsel roll clumsily onto the china with a soft thud. It was theater. Pure, calculated theater. I had spent 2 years at Kyoto University in my 20s. I'd lived with a host family in a traditional machiya in Higashiyama. I learned to use chopsticks properly before I could confidently write my own name in hiragana. But I wanted him comfortable. I needed him to feel superior, to believe he had completely fooled the old, fumbling academic. The gesture cost me nothing. But the grateful, almost condescending smile he gave me in return. Sarah reached over and squeezed me. Her skin was warm. "I know this is fast, Dad," she whispered, her eyes shimmered. "But when you know. Kenji makes me feel safe, supported, and he respects you so much. He insisted we tell you first before anyone else." I looked at her face, at the unguarded hope there, and a memory, sharp and clear, pierced through me, teaching her to use chopsticks when she was 7. She'd laughed in frustration, dropping edamame beans all over the kitchen table, her small brow furrowed in concentration. I'd been so patient, so encouraging. That memory, her absolute trust in me, sat next to this moment with a crushing, unbearable weight. "I appreciate that," I told them both, forcing a warmth into my voice I no longer felt. I raised my sake cup. To new beginnings. We drank. The sake, despite its quality, tasted like ash on my tongue. And then the catalyst. Kenji's phone buzzed against the table, a violent little tremor. He glanced at the screen, and for a fleeting moment, something raw flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe a spike of fear, before the polished mask slammed back into place. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a little too bright. "Business call. I should take this." He stood, moving toward the sliding glass door that led to my small, brick-paved terrace. Work never stops in finance. Sarah leaned close to me after he'd stepped outside, leaving the door open just a crack. "See," she said, her voice full of pride. "He's so dedicated. That's what I love about him. He takes responsibility so seriously." I nodded, on Kenji's back, making a non-committal width of the terrace, but my eyes were locked phone pressed on the half-open door. The low murmur of his voice filtered through the gap, a rhythmic, indistinct stream, and then my blood ran cold. Because the language coming through that opening wasn't English, it was Japanese. My entire body went still. The academic part of my brain, the part that had parsed the complex grammar of 11th century court diaries, switched on automatically. The father part of me simply froze. The words reached me, clear as bells in the evening air. His Japanese was fluent, casual, stripped of the careful modulation he used in English. This was his real voice. And he laughed, a short, ugly sound, completely different from the warm, respectful chuckles he'd offered at my table. "Takeshi, just a bit longer," he said, the words dripping with irritation. The old fool doesn't suspect a thing. He spent $200 on sushi trying to impress me. Can you believe it? His house is worth over $1 million. Richmond District, prime location, plus whatever retirement money he saved from 35 years of teaching. I can put up with his patronizing dinner parties for that. I stopped breathing. My wine glass was suspended halfway to my lips. I so carefully, set it back down on the table without making a sound. My hand was steady. A terrifying calm had descended upon me. Once we're married, the green card is locked in. California community property laws are a beautiful thing. I'll get half of everything if we divorce. And if the old man dies while we're married and Sarah inherits, even better. My visa expires in November. The September wedding timing works perfectly. Each word was a nail, precise and deliberate, hammered into the coffin of my daughter's future. I heard dollar amounts, property values, inheritance timelines. He was discussing the dismantling of my life's work, the exploitation of my daughter's
Business
heart,
proposal,
with the
call
cold
ended.
detachment of
I
a
heard the
man
shuffle of
reviewing
him
pocketing his phone. I took a slow, silent breath, arranging my face into a mask of pleasant neutrality just as he stepped back inside, sliding the door shut behind him. His expression had transformed back into the perfect, devoted son-in-law. All warmth, all gratitude. Sorry about that, he said, settling back into his chair as if he owned it. Client emergency, but it's handled now. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Thompson. And thank you again for this evening, for welcoming me into your home. He looked at Sarah, his gaze dripping with feigned affection. In Japanese culture, family approval means everything. I promise to honor Sarah and to cherish what you've built here. What you've built here, the words hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. Not become part of your family. Not take care of your daughter. What you've built, my house, my savings, my life, they were just assets in a ledger he had already totaled. I smiled at him. It was the most difficult performance of my life, and then I spoke. In flawless, Kansai-accented Japanese, the pitch patterns of someone who hadn't just studied the language, but had lived it, breathed it in the old streets of Kyoto. Kodosher no sakura wa kiriai diseni? I said, my voice calm and clear. This year's cherry blossoms are beautiful, aren't they? It was an innocuous phrase. Simple, seasonal small talk. But in that context, in that moment, it was a tactical nuclear strike. For a single, glorious heartbeat, Kenji's face went utterly, completely blank. The blood drained from his features, leaving him a pale, waxy mask. Shock, raw and undisguised, flickered in his eyes. Then, a dawning, horrifying comprehension. Then, pure, unadulterated fear. I watched his brain scramble, his neurons frantically trying to calculate a new strategy, finding only a terrifying void. His smile tried to reconstruct itself, but it was a ghastly, twitching thing. Yes, he finally stammered, in English, his voice a full octave higher. Spring is lovely. Sarah glanced between us, her brow furrowed. You speak Japanese, Dad? You never told me that. Picked up a few phrases during my research years. I said mildly, cutting another piece of sashimi with practiced ease. Nothing impressive. But Kenji knew. Oh, he knew. I watched him process the cataclysm. He understood that I had heard everything. That the foolish old man, fumbling with chopsticks, was a fiction. That the professor had been analyzing him all along. He recovered. I'll give him that. Years of practiced deception make for a smooth facade. But his hand trembled just slightly when he reached for his water glass. A tiny, telltale tremor that screamed of a foundation cracking. That we finished the dinner in a strange, new tension that only Kenji and I could feel. A silent war had been declared across the remains of the sushi. Sarah chattered on about venue ideas and guest lists, still wrapped in her blissful ignorance. Kenji responded, but his answers were clipped, and he didn't meet my eyes directly anymore. When they finally left around 9, Sarah hugged me at the door, her body warm and trusting. Thank you for being so welcoming, Dad. I knew you'd like him. I watched her tail lights disappear down the street, a knot of cold, hard resolve forming in my gut. Then I walked back inside and stood in my silent kitchen, staring at the expensive bottle of sake Kenji had brought. A $120 retail bottle. An investment, not a gift. Everything was a calculation. I left it unopened on the counter and walked to my study. The battlefield
Tomorrow morning,
was chosen. I would begin.
The enemy
that I
was
didn't sleep
identified.
that night. I lay in the dark, my mind a high-definition recorder, replaying every contemptuous syllable Kenji had spoken on my terrace. The old fool. His house worth over $1 million. California community property laws. Each phrase was delivered with the precision of a man who had researched his angles, calculated his outcomes, planned an acquisition disguised as a romance. By 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I went to my study, the blue light of the monitor painting the room in a ghostly glow. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Research_Property_Law. Innocuous enough if Sarah ever saw it. Inside that folder, I began my work. This was my element. This was what I had trained for my entire adult life: methodical, evidence-based research. I was building a thesis, and my hypothesis was simple. Kenji Yamamoto is a predator engaged in a deliberate campaign of marriage fraud and financial exploitation. My evidence would need to be irrefutable. Day 1. The digital footprint. I started with the low-hanging fruit. Linkage. Kenji's profile said he worked at Meridian Financial Partners, a mid-tier firm downtown, not the prestigious Greenfield Partners he'd named over dinner. A small lie, but a telling one. His profile was sparse, listing 3 years there, no advanced degrees, a paltry number of connections. I cross-referenced salary data for senior analysts in San Francisco. Probably $85,000 to $95,000. Comfortable, but Sarah, as a product manager, made $145,000. The financial calculus was already shifting. He wasn't bringing stability to her life. She was the prize he had targeted. Day 2. The legal labyrinth that I spent hours at the public library, using my retired faculty database access to dive
his expiration
into immigration
as he'd
law.
so helpfully
H,
stated,
1B visas,
was in
the
November.
kind I assumed he was
Marriage
on,
to a U.S.
are valid
citizen
for 6
provides
years
the
maximum.
fastest
Path to a green card. File for adjustment of status immediately after marriage. Approval typically within a year. The timeline was brutally, perfectly logical. A September wedding gave him a 2-month cushion to file the paperwork before his work authorization collapsed. He wasn't just in love, he was on a deadline. Day 4. The community whispered I drove to Japantown, to Kara. Hiroshi Tanaka, the owner, has known me for over 20 years. We've had countless conversations about Basho's poetry and the changing face of the neighborhood. Walter's son, he greeted me, wiping down the counter. Your usual? Actually, Hiroshi, I wanted to ask you something. I kept my tone light, conversational. My daughter Sarah is engaged to a young man from Japan. Kenji Yamamoto works in finance downtown. You know how small this community can be. Thought you might have crossed paths. Hiroshi's friendly expression shifted. Something careful entered his eyes. He glanced toward the back of the restaurant, then back to me. Yamamoto? Yes, he said slowly. I've seen someone by that name. Late evenings, sometimes. The pause stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Walter, you've been coming here 20 years. Some establishments in Japantown. They're not what they appear. I've seen men lose more than money there. He seems like a nice young man in daylight, he added, almost apologetically. But nights tell different stories. Gambling. The word hung in the air between us, unsaid but understood. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A man with a secret habit, with debts, is a desperate man. And desperate men make dangerous choices. Day 7. The human cost, Sarah called, her voice bubbling with venue ideas. Then, carefully, she asked the question I knew was coming. Dad, I know this is huge, but could you help with the wedding costs? Maybe Kenji's family situation is complicated. They can't contribute right now. $50,000. I thought of Hiroshi's warning, of the unpaid judgments I hadn't yet discovered. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice a masterclass in paternal support. Let me make some arrangements. These things take a few weeks to organize properly. Thank you, Dad. Kenji said you'd understand. He really admires your generosity. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my study. Kenji had anticipated this. He was already directing the flow of capital, another asset to be accessed. The audacity was breathtaking. Day 10. The private EY.my own research had given me a picture, but it was circumstantial. Suspicions, timeline analysis, vague warnings. It wasn't enough to show Sarah. She would dismiss it as prejudice, as an overprotective father. I needed concrete, undeniable proof that I opened my laptop and typed. Private investigator San Francisco Bay Area. 3 searches later, I found him. Marcus Webb, former SFPD detective. 5-star reviews praising his discretion and thoroughness. His flat rate was $3,500 for a standard background investigation. I picked up the phone. My daughter's future was worth infinitely more than $3,500. The coffee shop Marcus chose was in the financial district, anonymous and bustling. He looked exactly like a retired detective should. Mid-50s, gray hair cropped short, eyes that missed nothing. "I've been doing this 20 years, Marcus said, after scanning the timeline and notes I'd brought. "Most background checks on fiancés come back clean. Maybe some minor issues. But you're worried about something specific. He's marrying her 2 months before his work visa expires. Immigration fraud, I stated is flatly. Federal. The timing if that's what this is too convenient. You're potentially looking Marcus at someone facing deportation. You prepared for that. I'd rather know the ugly truth, I said, my voice steady, than believe a beautiful lie. I wrote him a check for a $1,500 deposit. The hunt was officially on. Day 12, the web tightens. While Marcus worked his side of the street, I worked mine. At the library, I accessed Pacer, the federal court database, and California civil records. A search for Kenji Yamamoto yielded 2 small claims judgments, $4,200 to a credit card company in June 2023 and $3,800 to a personal loan company that September. Both were unpaid. The dates were critical. His financial crisis predated Sarah. He was a sinking ship looking for a life raft. Then, a chance encounter. At a cafe in the Mission, the barista, a young woman named Jen, noticed my SF State alumni pin. Casual conversation turned serious when I mentioned my daughter was engaged to a Kenji Yamamoto. Her face froze. The smile vanished. "I knew a Kenji Yamamoto," she said carefully, after a long moment. "If it's the same person, be careful." On her break, she told me her story. Jennifer Chong. She dated Kenji for 8 months in 2023. He'd borrowed $5,000 for a family emergency in Japan. His mother needed surgery, he'd said. Promised repayment. Then he ghosted her, changed his number, blocked her on social media. She'd won a small claims judgment, but he had no assets to collect against. "He told me his mother needed surgery," Jennifer said, a bitter laugh in her voice. "I had that money saved for grad school. He was so charming, so convincing, until he got what he wanted. You weren't stupid," I told her, my heart aching for this stranger and for my daughter. "You were kind." He exploited that. Day 14, the proof. Marcus called. "I've got preliminary findings. Can you come by my office?" His space in Soma, he spread photos across his desk. Professional. Surveillance shots of Kenji entering an unmarked building in Oakland. 3 different nights. Timestamps showing 11 p.m., midnight, 1:00. "This building is known to us," Marcus said, his tone grim. "Illegal gambling establishment. High-stakes poker. Cash only. Your guy goes there, sometimes 3 nights a week." He laid out more documents. Credit card balances totaling $35,000. Personal loans, $22,000. And he added carefully, "My source in that community says he owes money to the operators. About $10,000. Maybe more. These aren't people you want to owe money to." "How desperate is he?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Desperate enough to make very bad decisions. Like marrying someone for immigration status and hoping her father's inheritance solves his debt problem. Then came the coup de grace. Marcus pulled out printed pages. Found he's on an immigration forum. User Tokyo_finance_guy_45. He slid them across. I read the thread, my blood turning to ice. Need advice. 1B expires in 1 year. Employer won't sponsor green card. Dating American citizen. How fast can marriage lead to green card? What's minimum marriage duration before divorce doesn't look suspicious. The responses discussed timelines, community property laws, inheritance considerations. And then, Kenji's reply under his username. Got it. So marriage plus patience equals permanent status plus financial stability. The calculation was explicit. Written down. Public. Traceable through IP addresses Marcus had confirmed matched Kenji's apartment. That evening, I sat in my study with the entire dossier spread before me. It was no longer a folder of suspicions. It was a weapon. Financial predation, $67,000 in documented debt, plus gambling liabilities, pattern of fraud, Jennifer Chong's testimony and the unpaid court judgments, immigration fraud intent, his job, the forum post, and the perfectly timed case. Character but evidence. I wasn't a prosecutor. The gambling habit, I was a father. The lies about. And showing this to Sarah now would be a declaration of war. She would see it as an attack, a violation. She would defend him, and I would lose her, that I needed a different strategy. A more elegant one. Patience. I will be patient. I would continue to play the supportive father, the generous future father-in-law. I would let Kenji believe he had weathered the storm of my Japanese revelation. I would let him get comfortable, let him get greedy, and eventually, he would make a mistake. Eventually, the truth would become so glaring that Sarah would have no choice but to see it. That I closed the folder. The chessboard was set. Now, I would let my opponent think he was still in control. That MY strategy had two prongs. First, continue my own quiet observation, documenting every new lie, every financial request. Second, and most crucially, construct a legal fortress so impenetrable that it would force Kenji's true colors to show. That I opened my browser and searched California Family Law Attorney, San Francisco Asset Protection. The first result was Richard Fletcher, Esquire. 30 years of experience. Strong reviews praising his thoroughness and strategic thinking. I wrote down his number. Tuesday morning, I was in his 15th floor office with its sweeping views of Market Street. Fletcher was 58, with precisely trimmed gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. A former prosecutor. Mr. Thompson, he said, gesturing to a leather chair. You mentioned potential fraud concerns. I opened my evidence folder, now 3 inches thick. My daughter Sarah is marrying Kenji Yamamoto in September. That I believe he's using her for immigration status and financial gain. I laid it out systematically, like presenting a dissertation. The timeline, the translated transcripts of the terrorist conversation, and the later one I'd overheard. Marcus Webb's report. The forum posts. Fletcher read everything without interruption, his face a mask of professional detachment. When he finished, he looked up. Mr. Thompson, in 30 years of practice, I've seen calculated exploitation. This is one of the most methodical. He's researched the law, planned his timeline, and targeted your daughter for her income and your assets. Can we protect her? I asked, my voice tight. We can. A properly drafted prenuptial agreement would neutralize his entire strategy. He paused. But she has to agree to it, and he has to sign it. That's the complication. He explained California's community property system with chilling precision. Without a prenup, anything Sarah earned during the marriage belonged equally to both spouses. Her $145,000 salary meant Kenji could claim over $70,000 for a single year of marriage, plus half the appreciation of her Oakland apartment. If I died during their marriage and she inherited my estate, he'd have a legal claim to a portion of it as community property. So his plan is legally viable, I stated, the reality hitting me anew, completely. That's what makes this so dangerous. The prenuptial agreement is your defensive line. Fletcher proposed a two-pronged strategy. First, draft the most comprehensive prenup possible, protecting all of Sarah's premarital assets, her future income, and any inheritance. It would include a clause stating that if the marriage ended within 3 years, Kenji would receive nothing. No assets, no support, no claims. Second, we would begin subtly planting seeds of doubt through Sarah's trusted friends, preparing her to consider legal protection without my direct paternal pressure. The prenuptial itself will be a test, Fletcher added. If he refuses to sign, his intentions become obvious. If he signs, well, you've at least protected her financially. His fees were $450 an hour. I wrote a check for a $5,000 retainer without a moment's hesitation. Draft the strongest protection possible. My daughter's future is worth any cost. Over the following days, I implemented the secondary strategy. A chance lunch with Linda Morrison, Sarah's colleague from the barbecue. Walter, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Dentist appointment nearby. Join me. We talked about Sarah, about the wedding. I asked for her impression of Kenji, keeping my tone casually concerned. He's charming, Linda said, choosing her words carefully. Very charming. But Sarah mentioned he's been asking a lot of questions. About your family, your house, your finances, her inheritance prospects. It feels less like getting to know you and more like due diligence. She paused. My ex did that before he proposed. Turned out he had serious gambling debts. The seed was planted. A few days later, Sarah stopped by. I accidentally left my tablet on the kitchen counter, the screen showing an article, Marriage Fraud Red Flags, When Immigration Status Drives Relationships. She noticed, "Dad, why are you reading about immigration marriage fraud? A colleague's daughter went through a terrible situation last year," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Met someone on a visa, rushed engagement. Turned out he was using her for a green card. Cost her emotionally and financially. Made me think about protecting the people we love." "That's not Kenji," Sarah said, but her voice held the slightest edge of uncertainty. "I'm sure it's not, sweetheart. But legal protection before marriage is smart, regardless. Has nothing to do with trust. Everything to do with prudence. I'll let that sit. If Kenji loves you, he'd want you protected too." She didn't respond. She just looked at the wedding she brought with slightly less enthusiasm than before. Late May, Fletcher's preliminary draft arrived. 20 pages of legal fortress. It neutralized Kenji's entire financial strategy. Fletcher's cover note read, "This is the test. If he signs, you've protected her. If he refuses, you've exposed him." I made a few notes, then opened my calendar. Early July, 2 months before the planned wedding. I would invite Sarah and Kenji for an important family conversation. I would present the prenup not as an accusation, but as a standard, prudent step for anyone with significant assets that I emailed Fletcher. "This is excellent. Let's finalize by mid-June. I'll need guidance on presenting this to my daughter without pushing her away." His response was swift. "I'll prepare talking points. Remember, you're not attacking her choice. You're protecting her future. There's a difference, and we'll make her see it." I closed the laptop. The trap was set. The pieces were in position. Kenji's confidence was his weakness. He thought he'd planned for everything, but he'd never faced a father who loved his daughter more than he wanted her to be happy in that moment. And that made all the difference that I called Sarah midweek. My tone was serious, but calm. "I'd like you and Kenji to come for dinner Sunday evening. There's something important we need to discuss before the wedding." She agreed, her voice laced with uncertainty. Sunday arrived. I prepared a simple meal, a roast chicken, some vegetables. Nothing elaborate. This was business, not a celebration. The dining room table held 3 glasses of water and a single, tan leather folder containing Fletcher's finalized prenuptial agreement. No wine. I wanted everyone clear-headed. They arrived at 6 p.m. Sarah looked hopeful, perhaps thinking this was a reconciliation. Kenji's smile was in place, but his eyes kept darting to that leather folder. "Weather. A smart man. Work." He sensed the shift in the atmosphere. When the dishes were clear, the small talk was stilted. Forced. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. "Sarah, Kenji," I began, my voice even and professorial. "Before any marriage involving significant assets, it's standard, prudent practice to have legal protection in place." I turned the document so Sarah could see the title. "I've had a prenuptial agreement prepared." Sarah's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, shock, and finally, a deep, wounded hurt. "Dad, what? A prenup? This protects your assets, sweetheart. Your Oakland apartment, your savings, your future income, any inheritance from me. These remain yours, regardless of what happens in the marriage." Kenji's charming mask cracked. His jaw tightened, a tiny muscle twitching near his eye. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice strained, This feels extreme. Sarah and I love each other. We're building a life together. Prenuptial agreements are for people who don't trust each other. They're for people who are prudent." I corrected him calmly. "Sarah's income exceeds $145,000 annually. She owns property. Without protection, California community property law means anyone she marries has a claim to half of everything earned during the marriage. That's not about trust. That's legal reality. You're treating our marriage like a business transaction." Kenji's voice rose, an edge of genuine anger creeping in. "I'm treating it like what it legally is," I replied, my gaze steady on him. "A contract with significant financial implications." Kenji stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is insulting. You're implying I'm marrying Sarah for money. That's discriminatory. You wouldn't require this from an American fiancé." I remained seated, watching his white-knuckled grip on the table edge. I would ask this of anyone marrying my daughter, regardless of nationality. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Wedding logistics. But since you mentioned it, when the dishes were cleared, I didn't offer dessert. I placed a folder on the table and opened it. Sarah, Kenji, I began, my voice even and professorial. Before any marriage involving significant assets, it's standard, prudent practice to have legal protection in place. I turned the document so Sarah could see the title. I've had a prenuptial agreement prepared. Sarah's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, shock, and finally, a deep, wounded hurt. Dad, what? A prenup? This protects your assets, sweetheart. Your Oakland apartment, your savings, your future income, any inheritance from me. These remain yours, regardless of what happens in the marriage. Kenji's charming mask cracked. His jaw tightened, a tiny muscle twitching near his eye. Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice strained. This feels extreme. Sarah and I love each other. We're building a life together. Prenuptial agreements are for people who don't trust each other. They're for people who are prudent, I corrected him calmly. Sarah's income exceeds $145,000 annually. She owns property. Without protection, California community property law means anyone she marries has a claim to half of everything earned during the marriage. That's not about trust. That's legal reality. You're treating our marriage like a business transaction. Kenji's voice rose, an edge of genuine anger creeping in. I'm treating it like what it legally is, I replied, my gaze steady on him. A contract with significant financial implications. Kenji stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is insulting. You're implying I'm marrying Sarah for money. That's discriminatory. You wouldn't require this from an American fiancé. I remained seated, watching his white-knuckled grip on the table edge. I would ask this of anyone marrying my daughter, regardless of nationality. I paused, your age, letting the silence stretch. 1B visa expires in November, doesn't it? 4 months after your planned September wedding. His face paled, the blood draining away so quickly I thought he might faint. What does that have to do with anything? Just noting that the timing is convenient. Marriage to a U.S. citizen allows for an adjustment of status. That's public information. Sarah looked between us, her face a canvas of wounded confusion. Dad, are you suggesting? I spoke gently, turning my full attention to her. I'm suggesting that before any major commitment, we ensure everyone's intentions are clear and everyone is protected. Kenji's voice was nearing a shout. This is manipulative. You're using your money to control her. I let the silence hang for a beat, thick and heavy. Then I looked him dead in the eye and switched to Japanese. Sakura no hanaji karu and I, anata no kikikomo karu daho. Like cherry blossoms scattering, your plan, too, will scatter. His face went utterly blank. The reminder that I understood Japanese, that I was not the ignorant old fool from his phone conversations, hit him like a physical blow. I saw the memory of the terrace, of his own contemptuous words, flash in his eyes that I switched back to English, my voice cold and precise. In Japan, the concept of i.e., maintaining the household assets and lineage, is taken very seriously. Prenuptial arrangements exist there, too. So, let's not pretend this is an American peculiarity or a sign of distrust. It's universal wisdom. That's different, Kenji managed to stammer. Is it? I slid the document across the table. Read it. Carefully. Discuss it together. I encourage Kenji to have his own attorney review it. But understand this. This is not optional. If you marry without this protection, I cannot support this wedding, financially or emotionally. That is my final position. The evening ended, as I knew it would, in tears and fury. Kenji shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred as he guided her out, the prenuptial folder clutched in his hand that I stood in my doorway, watching their car disappear. My phone buzzed. A text from Fletcher. How did it go? I typed back, my fingers steady. He took the bait. Now we see if he's smart enough to sign or desperate enough to refuse. The confrontation was over. The real unraveling was about to begin. For 3 days, there was only silence. The longest Sarah and I had gone without speaking since she left for college. I fought the urge to call her every hour, to explain, to beg. But Fletcher's voice echoed in my mind. Patience, Walter. Patience. That on the fourth day, she finally called. Her voice was strained, distant, as if she were speaking from the other side of a great chasm. Dad, we've discussed the prenup. Kenji won't sign it. I waited. He says it's racist. That you're treating him this way because he's Japanese, because he's an immigrant. He feels insulted and disrespected. I could hear Kenji's words coming through her mouth, his talking points, his masterful reframing of a defensive measure into a prejudiced attack. And what do you think, Sarah? I think it's insulting to him. It's like you don't trust my judgment. I trust your judgment about character, I said carefully. I don't trust